Hello and welcome to ET Inside, where we get you a 360-degree view of the big picture in business and economy. I'm Nikhil Narayan, and here's what we have for you on the show today. For the first time since India liberalized in 1991, the government and industry are at each other's throat. Why have things turned ugly? The fight is threatening to worsen the country's business environment. What can prevent a systemic breakdown? And CII President-designate Adi Godrej spells out why it's important for all stakeholders to keep the faith.
So I think there was perhaps a bit of misunderstanding between industry and the government.
Our top story first. Be it telecom, aviation, mining, energy or manufacturing, there's hardly any sector where the government isn't at loggerheads with industry. It's quite a contrast to the relationship the two have shared as the country over the years opened up key sectors to private investment and created new billionaires almost overnight. So why is it suddenly that as far as industry is concerned, the government can do no right? And the government in turn is furious that corporate chieftains would rather blame New Delhi than take responsibility for change. Nikhil Sivadas has more on what's brought things to a head.
India's engine of economic growth is humming to a slow halt. Industry says a policy paralysis in New Delhi is driving investors away and making a bad situation worse. The government agrees there's a slowdown, but says industry leaders are painting a picture bleaker than it is.
I would only request the captains of the industries assembled here, if we have problems, it is for us to solve the problems. Merely reiterating that distress condition is not going to help us.
But the government has woken up to these issues a little too late. Early last year, several industrialists and bankers had written an open letter to the government, making an appeal for the centre to launch an aggressive crackdown on the deep-rooted corruption in the Indian system. The letter, written collectively by HDFC's Deepak Parekh, Wipro's Asim Premji, former RBI Governor Bimal Jalan, Keshav Mahendra, N. Wagul and Anu Aga, criticized the government for its shortcomings and deficit in governance. It suggested that the government set up an independent watchdog and establish self-regulating probe agencies, and even set up Lokayuktas in every state to take on corruption cases on a war footing. And last but not the least, it slammed the lack of consensus between the centre and the state governments over balancing development and environment issues.
If you see your ministers in jail, if you see more cases being filed, if you see the judiciary is stepping in to take over because otherwise you don't get investigations, and nobody takes responsibility for what has gone wrong, and you have people pointing fingers here, people pointing fingers here, then the surface rises to a point of great concern.
Shortly after this letter, the same set of leaders once again sent a written appeal to the government for land, judicial and electoral reforms and asked for an effective mechanism to tackle corruption, and asked for measures to improve the investment climate and policy uncertainties which were forcing companies to look for opportunities in other parts of the world. The letter stated that there were high levels of corruption in government departments and that anyone dealing with them had to bear the brunt of it. The letter also highlighted the nexus between some companies, politicians, bureaucrats and power brokers, and stated that there is an impasse on environmental clearances for industrial projects.
If the industrialist or the entrepreneur is scared that he may have to go inside the jail, he would not like to bribe. But today, if he is caught, only the person who receives the bribe goes in. So I think if we come out with some legislation which is workable, efficient, I think we can get over this.
It was a turbulent time for the Indian economy, which was already saddled with a slowdown in growth due to uncontrollably high food prices. A time when rampant corruption came to the fore and key ministers were accused of large-scale subterfuge. And a time when citizens took matters in their own hands and demanded more transparency in governance. But India's problems were not restricted to her own territory. There was a global economic storm building up in Europe, with economies of Greece, Portugal, Spain, Ireland and Italy teetering on the brink of a collapse. That's not all. World prices of commodities were rising until then, taking their toll on buyers, which meant that while India's exports were slowing down, its import bill was ballooning, and so was its trade deficit. A higher than expected current account deficit and the uncertainty in political and economic environment made investors go cold turkey on India. So when a worried industry appealed to the government for help, its concerns were not taken lightly.
I am not sitting on the value judgment of the views of leaders of the industry. They have genuine concerns. And after all, whom they will speak? They will speak to the government.
What followed was a series of serious moves to spruce up the economy. At the top of the government's agenda was the Lokpal bill, which aims at bringing in more transparency in governance. But the bill has been mired in controversy since it was first tabled in Parliament. To date, the government is struggling to get the approval on this bill. Next in line was its decision to permit 51% FDI in multi-brand retail and raising FDI in single-brand retail from 51 to 100%. But this proposal too has hit the opposition roadblock.
We are in complete opposition both to the merit of the issue of opening up the FDI, opening up the retail sector for FDI, and the method in which this decision was taken when the Parliament was in session.
The political standoff finally forced the government to roll back its proposal. But this was just the potent portion that the Indian economy needed. So once again, India Inc. rose to the occasion. But this time it tried to engage with the opposition. An open letter to the opposition was written by Sunil Bharti Mittal, who suggested that the opposition cooperate on economic reforms. But this suggestion did not go down well with the opposition party that wanted politics restricted to politicians.
He does not understand the political processes of the country. If that is his impression, then it's entirely wrong. It's always up to the ruling party, the ruling coalition in our system to build a consensus.
From reforms getting lost in debates to the government creating uncertainties in the business environment, like it has in several cases recently. For instance, the government recently asked 5 telecom operators to stop their inter-circle roaming on 3G bandwidth within 24 hours. Soon, private operators challenged the matter in the TDSAT and the tribunal issued a stay order on the government order restraining telecom companies. It directed the Department of Telecom not to take any coercive action against telecom operators. The government replied by saying operators need separate licenses for 3G and questioned the tribunal's jurisdiction in the 3G roaming issue.
Licensees will come to us and say, why are you allowing a person who doesn't have a license in that circle to take a customer?
I don't see any reason why 3G ICR should not be allowed. Government gets more revenues.
That's right.
Customers benefit through competition, and you are using very, very scarce and difficult resource in the country for much larger population. So why not do it?
These U-turns by the government have become annoying in recent months. Take for instance the case of Reliance Industries' KG D6 block. Earlier, the company was to relinquish 25% of the gas-bearing KG D6 block in 2004 and a similar area in 2006. But the Directorate General of Hydrocarbons stated that the relinquishing the areas was not necessary. A committee of the Oil Ministry upheld the DGH view. But recently, the decision to allow RIL to retain the entire block has been criticized as a violation of contract by the CAG. That's not all. A top bureaucrat in the Oil Ministry has recently stated that RIL's production sharing contract for the block with the global major BP will be changed. Soon, RIL served an arbitration notice to the ministry.
Law Ministry does not quantify. They only provide legal opinion. So they have provided an opinion. We are in fact considering.
There will be no changes in the production sharing contract. If there are changes, they will be introduced from the 10th round. They will only have prospective effect.
There are several other instances of government and industry being at loggerheads. And this does not augur well for the Indian economy. Especially not now when the rupee is touching new lows on account of a larger than expected current account deficit. A further slowdown in growth threatens not just industrial and economic growth but also the public at large. The economy needs to return to its growth path, and the only way to do that is by pushing for a virtuous cycle of higher production, more jobs and lower prices. And if this problem is not taken care of now, it's the people of this country who will bear the brunt of poor politics.
So what can and should be done to improve India's plight? That's coming up after the short break. Don't go away.